Have you ever noticed how your brain treats money differently when you're broke versus when you actually have some breathing room? You know what I mean. When you've got $237 in your checking account, every purchase feels like a life or death decision. But something weird happens when you cross a certain threshold. Your entire relationship with money starts to shift in ways you never expected. Well, here's something that might blow your mind. There's a specific number where this transformation really kicks in, and it's not what most financial gurus talk about. We're not talking about the famous first 100,000 that everyone obsesses over. We're talking about something way more achievable but equally powerful. I'm talking about $15,000. That's the magic number where your money mindset fundamentally changes, where you stop thinking like someone who's constantly in survival mode and start thinking like someone who's actually building something. My name is Nick, and I've spent years analyzing the psychological shifts that happen when people reach different financial milestones. If you're ready to understand how money really works in your brain, and you want to accelerate your journey to financial confidence, make sure to subscribe and smash that like button, because what I'm about to reveal could completely transform how you think about building wealth. Now, before we get into why $15,000 is such a game changer, let me paint you a picture of what most people experience with their finances. They're stuck in what I call the anxiety loop. They work hard, they bring home a paycheck, and immediately that money gets divided up among bills, debt payments, groceries, and maybe a few small pleasures that keep them sane. By the time the next paycheck rolls around, they're back to square one. Zero progress, zero momentum, zero hope that things will ever be different. This creates a specific type of financial psychology that's absolutely toxic to wealth building. When you're constantly operating from a place of scarcity, your brain goes into survival mode. You make decisions based on fear rather than strategy. You grab the short-term relief instead of the long-term win. You avoid looking at your bank account because the truth is too stressful. And worst of all, you start to believe that this is just how life is for people like you. But here's what's fascinating about human psychology. We don't need massive amounts of money to break out of this pattern. We just need enough to flip the script in our heads. We need enough to move from defense to offense, from reactive to proactive, from surviving to strategizing. And that number, based on everything I've studied and experienced, is right around $15,000. Let me explain why this specific amount is so powerful. First, $15,000 represents about 3 months of expenses for the average person. And 3 months is the point where your brain stops treating every day like a financial emergency. When you know you've got 3 months of runway, you can breathe, you can think, you can make decisions based on what's smart rather than what's urgent. This psychological shift is massive. Suddenly, when your car makes a weird noise, you're not panicking about how you'll afford the repair. You're calmly taking it to a mechanic. When you see a great opportunity, whether it's a professional development course or a side business investment, you can actually consider it instead of automatically dismissing it because money is tight. Second, $15,000 is achievable enough that it doesn't feel like fantasy. When financial experts tell you to save your first $100,000, that number feels so distant that it's almost demotivating. It's like telling someone who's never run before to train for a marathon. Sure, it's possible, but it seems so far away that they never take the first step. But $15,000, that's different. That's a goal you can actually visualize reaching. If you save $500 a month, you're there in 30 months. If you hustle and save $1,000 a month, you're there in 15 months. That's not some distant future. That's real. That's tangible. That's something worth fighting for starting today. Third, and this is where it gets really interesting, $15,000 is the point where your money can start making meaningful contributions to your financial life. The interest on $1,000 is basically nothing. Even at a decent rate, you're looking at maybe $50 a year. But $15,000 invested properly can generate $1,500 or more annually. That's real money. That's a vacation. That's a car repair. That's breathing room. When you see your money actually working for you in noticeable ways, something clicks in your brain. You start to understand that wealth building isn't just about deprivation and sacrifice. It's about creating systems where your money multiplies itself. You start thinking like an investor rather than just a saver. And that mental shift is worth more than any amount of financial advice. Now let me walk you through what actually happens to your mindset as you approach and cross this $15,000 threshold. Because understanding these psychological shifts will help you recognize them when they happen to you and leverage them to accelerate your wealth building even further. The first shift happens around $5,000. This is what I call the hope threshold. For most people, $5,000 is the first time they've ever had a meaningful amount of money that isn't earmarked for something specific. It's not your rent money or your car payment, it's just there. And that feeling of having a cushion, even a small one, plants a seed in your mind. The seed that says maybe, just maybe, you can actually do this wealth building thing. At this stage, you start paying more attention to your finances. You check your account more often, not out of fear, but out of curiosity. You start reading articles about investing. You begin to see possibilities where before you only saw limitations. The second shift happens around $8,000. This is the confidence threshold. At this point, you've proven to yourself that you can save money consistently. You've developed habits. You've made sacrifices. You've said no to things that would have derailed your progress. And most importantly, you've watched that number grow month after month. This builds a type of confidence that's hard to describe until you've experienced it. You start to believe that you're the kind of person who's good with money. You start making different choices automatically because they align with your new identity. Someone who's building wealth doesn't blow their entire paycheck on impulse purchases. Someone who's building wealth thinks about the future. The third shift, and this is the big one, happens right around $15,000. This is the transformation threshold. This is where your entire operating system upgrades. You're no longer thinking about money in terms of scarcity. You're thinking about it in terms of strategy. You're no longer asking, can I afford this? You're asking, is this the best use of my resources? You're no longer reacting to financial situations. You're anticipating them and planning for them. Here's what's wild about this transformation. Once it happens, it's almost impossible to go back to your old way of thinking. It's like learning to ride a bike. Once you get it forever. Even if you face financial setbacks later, you'll have the knowledge and the mindset to rebuild. You'll know what's possible because you've already done it once. Let me share some specific examples of how this mindset shift manifests in real decisions. Before reaching $15,000, most people see their emergency fund as something they might need to raid for various semi-emergencies. The car needs new tires, that's an emergency. The laptop is acting up, that's an emergency. A friend's destination wedding, that's basically an emergency. After reaching $15,000, your definition of emergency becomes much more strict. You realize that most of these situations aren't true emergencies, they're just expenses. And you handle them differently. Maybe you start a separate sinking fund for predictable expenses like car maintenance. Maybe you build buffer room into your regular budget. The point is, you stop treating your emergency fund like a slush fund because you understand its real purpose. Before $15,000, investment opportunities feel scary and risky. You hear about the stock market, and all you can think about is losing money. You avoid investing because you can't afford to lose what little you have. After $15,000, you start to understand that not investing is actually the riskier choice. You realize that inflation is eating away at your purchasing power every single year. You understand that the stock market, despite its short-term volatility, has been the most reliable wealth-building tool in history. You're ready to take calculated risks because you have the foundation to support them. Before $15,000, your career decisions are driven primarily by immediate financial need. You take the job that pays a bit more right now, even if it's a dead end. You avoid asking for raises because you're just grateful to have income. You stay in situations that aren't serving you because change feels too risky. After $15,000, you can make career decisions based on long-term value. You can invest in skills that will pay off later. You can negotiate from a position of strength because you're not desperate. You can take strategic risks like starting a side business or transitioning to a better career path because you have a runway to support yourself during the transition. Before $15,000, debt feels like a permanent part of your life. You make minimum payments and hope for the best. You might even take on new debt because you don't see any other option. After $15,000, you develop a strategic approach to debt. You understand the difference between good debt and bad debt. You create aggressive payoff plans for high-interest debt. You avoid taking on new consumer debt because you've experienced the freedom of having money in the bank, and you never want to go back to being broke. Now, let's talk about how to actually reach this transformational milestone. Because understanding the psychology is great, but you need practical strategies to make it happen. The first key is to treat reaching $15,000 as your primary financial goal, not saving for retirement, not paying off all your debt, not buying a house. Your first goal is to get $15,000 in the bank. Everything else comes after. This might seem controversial because conventional wisdom says you should be doing everything at once. Saving for retirement, building an emergency fund, paying off debt, saving for a house. But here's the problem with that approach. When you're trying to do everything, you end up doing nothing particularly well. Your efforts get diluted. Your progress feels slow. Your motivation fades. By focusing intensely on reaching $15,000 first, you create momentum. You see real progress. You experience the psychological benefits of hitting a major milestone. And then, from that position of strength, you can tackle everything else more effectively. The second key is to find ways to accelerate your savings rate beyond what seems possible with your current income. This means getting creative. This means side hustles, selling stuff you don't need, negotiating raises, cutting expenses that don't align with your values. I'm not talking about living like a monk forever. I'm talking about going into sprint mode for a defined period. Maybe it's 1 year, maybe it's 2 years, but during that time, you're laser focused on reaching $15,000. You're saying no to expenses that don't matter. You're saying yes to opportunities that bring in extra income. You're treating this goal like it's the most important thing in your financial life, because it is. The third key is to keep this money separate and sacred. Open a high-yield savings account at a different bank from your checking account. Make it slightly inconvenient to access. Name the account something meaningful like Freedom Fund or Future Me. This psychological separation is crucial. When that money is mixed in with your checking account, it doesn't feel real. It feels like money you could spend if you really wanted to, but when it's separate, when you have to take deliberate action to access it, it becomes real. It becomes something you're building, something you're protecting, something that represents your future. Here's what I want you to understand about this journey. Reaching $15,000 isn't just about having money in the bank. It's about proving to yourself that you can do hard things. It's about developing the habits and mindset that will serve you for the rest of your life. It's about crossing over from the world of people who are stuck in the paycheck to paycheck cycle to the world of people who are building real wealth. Every person who's achieved financial independence passed through this milestone. They remember what it felt like to hit $15,000. They remember the confidence it gave them. They remember how it changed the way they thought about money and possibilities. And they'll tell you that this early milestone was just as important as the bigger numbers that came later, because this is where the transformation really begins. This is where you stop being someone who struggles with money and start being someone who builds wealth. The beautiful thing is that once you reach $15,000, the next milestones come faster. You've developed the discipline, you've built the habits, you've experienced the satisfaction of watching your net worth grow. Getting to $25,000 happens quicker, then $50,000, then that famous first $100,000. Each milestone builds on the previous one, creating momentum that becomes almost unstoppable. But it all starts with this first major threshold. It all starts with proving to yourself that you can save $15,000. So here's my challenge to you. Decide right now that reaching $15,000 is your primary financial goal. Calculate how long it will take at different savings rates, then figure out how to cut that timeline in half. What would you need to do to get there in half the time? That's your plan. If you found this valuable, make sure to subscribe because I'll be sharing more insights on the psychology of wealth and the specific strategies that actually work. Until next time, keep pushing toward that transformation threshold. Your future self is waiting.